Do you feel, Professor Turley, that our Constitution is still strong enough to preserve our different opinions throughout society now, especially with, I think as we go through the summer and then come out of the summer, as we're going to see a lot of heated debate and emotion, probably even hitting the streets and back in the universities again. Do you think the Constitution is strong enough to withhold such passion?
I do. One of the things that I go into in the book is that this is not our first age of rage. That's why it's entitled An Age of Rage, not The Age of Rage. We've gone through this before. It's ironic that often people who want to limit free speech or other constitutional rights will portray their times as different, the threats that they face as existential and unprecedented. They're not. These are the same voices that we've heard throughout our history. They're often saying the very same things. In fact, one of the aspects of the book that I most value is to point out that they use the same actual terms. Things like fake news was a term used at the very start of our republic to support censorship. But we have survived. And one of the reasons is that our Constitution wasn't just written for times like these. It was written in a time like this. I mean, the Federalists, the Jeffersonians hated each other. The language, the divisions, the accusations are almost identical to the ones we hear today. I once was testifying and a member of Congress told me, Professor, I know you always talk about James Madison and the framers, but these are different times. People today talk like they want to kill each other. And I interrupted him and said, they were actually trying to kill each other back then. I mean, they weren't just talking about it. That's what the Alien Sedition Acts were. So don't pretend that you're facing some problem that requires you to go rogue, that requires you to take extra constitutional means. There's nothing new about you or these problems. But what is something we've seen before is a crisis of faith. That's what we're seeing. That's what these voices are. They don't have faith in the constitutional system. They don't have faith in each other. That's why free speech is always the first thing to be attacked in an age of rage, because we lack a faith in each other. We begin to believe that the only way that the country can survive is if we silence people with opposing views.
And that lack of faith that you're talking about isn't just at the level of the citizenry today. It's also in our Congress. I know from experience and in reading your book that we've had senators, and including, like, for example, Senator Coons, who has stepped up and in the halls of Senate has suggested that we actually pull back a little bit with regards of freedom of speech, with regards to the First Amendment, in an effort to protect climate change, right?
Right. And it's a strange thing. I was raised a liberal Democrat. I'm still quite liberal on social issues. I'm still a Democrat. But I never imagined that the Democratic Party would embrace censorship, blacklisting, the way it has. After all, the McCarthy period, which is discussed in the book, the Red Scare, those were directed against the left. And now the strongest voices for censorship is coming from the left. And that's why both parties have had their periods in which they have become opponents to free speech. Today, it's the time for the left. But I have to say, it's really quite disorienting. I worked for Ted Kennedy. I worked for Mo Udall. If you had told me that there would ever be a time when Democratic members would stand up and defend censorship, which they have, I would have told you were crazy. I was in one hearing where I testified against the censorship system that is currently being developed. And this is a system that a federal judge called Orwellian. And after Musk bought Twitter and released the Twitter files, Democrats who had previously said there's no proof of coordination switched and just started to say that they support censorship because free speech is dangerous. It's harmful. It has to be controlled. And one of the members, Goldman from New York, told me, Professor, you seem to forget, because you're an absolutist when it comes to free speech, that Oliver Wendell Holmes said you can't cry fire in a crowded theater. And I said, Congressman, you do realize, right, that line comes from Schenck, which the court ultimately abandoned. It was a line used to uphold the conviction of a socialist for political speech, for simply putting out a pamphlet. What Charles Schenck did is he put out a pamphlet entitled Assert Your Rights. That was the title. On the back of it, it praised the Constitution, said, "Long live the Constitution." It was a pamphlet educating people as to their right of protest. He was put in jail for that, and that line was used to justify it. And Goldman cut me off and said, "We don't need a law lecture today, Professor." And I said, "Well, we really do need some form of a lecture, because the strange thing that the book tries to capture is that free speech is one of those rights which is most cherished at a distance, right? We can look back in history and be mortified on what happened in the McCarthy period, what happened under the Adams administration. We can be aghast and say, how could they have ever allowed that to occur? But when you're in a period like this, you lose that perspective. That's why I talk about rage rhetoric. Rage rhetoric is something we have struggled with throughout our history, and it tends to become state rage. That is, when people hear rage rhetoric, either they think it's righteous if they're the ones that are enraged, or dangerous if they don't agree with that viewpoint.